I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Currents. Tomorrow's lawyers take a look at today's pro-life movement.
These individuals, if we educate them now, they sort of are the future of the movement.
Poland continues to grieve a tragic loss. And 1 year later, an earthquake-ravaged city picks up the pieces. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Matt McClure has the night off. What is the future of the pro-life movement and abortion laws here in the U.S.? It is a question that many have been asking since last month's historic vote on health care. Abortion funding was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, hang-up in the health care debate. Last week, we had a chance to check out a side of the pro-life movement we don't normally see. Tomorrow's lawyers took a look into the future. With the passage of the new health care law, abortion is at the forefront of national discourse, splitting the Republican and Democratic parties, general opinion, as well as lawmakers. Taking a cue from this, Columbia University's Law Students for Life group organized a symposium last week titled Looking Back, Looking Forward, Pro-Life Strategy and Jurisprudence for the 21st Century, to discuss current issues around abortion.
Well, we started planning for this conference about a year ago. And the goal of it is to bring all kinds of speakers in who are really professionals and on the cutting edge of all of these interesting issues that matter to the pro-life movement.
The day-long event included panels on such issues as the protection of conscience rights of medical practitioners, international abortion law, and First Amendment rights of sidewalk counselors.
Anytime you're within a certain number of feet of any healthcare facility, you can't come within 8 feet of someone to talk to them unless you get their consent first. I was here today speaking about free speech rights in front of abortion clinics and specifically different statutes and injunctions that are in place throughout the country that limit the right of even peaceful people to engage in speech with willing listeners on a public sidewalk, making that criminal in front of abortion clinics in ways that it's perfectly permitted every place else in the country. It's got two aspects of it. One is the speaker has a First Amendment right on a public sidewalk to speak. But the second, and in many ways the more important one, is the woman coming into the clinic having a right to listen and a right to decide for herself who she wants to listen to.
The event wrapped up with a panel on how students and lawyers can help the pro-life movement.
Regardless of where you're called to work once you graduate from law school, there's a couple of things I kind of wanted to touch on that you can focus on while in law school. First is to build a solid personal foundation. And then second, how can you use this foundation to lead and educate those within the classroom, within the law school community at large. Law students are the future of the pro-life movement. We're training future lawyers, future legislators, future judges, and these individuals, if we educate them now, they sort of are the future of the movement.
And that was one of the reasons the Columbia University's Law Students for Life group was started 2 years ago.
There were about a handful of us who were interested in making more of a voice for people who had the pro-life view on the campus. There wasn't much representation of that view, although there was an opposing organization that was focused on the pro-choice point of view. So we really wanted to just essentially have this view presented and make it seem reasonable to our peers so that they were at least aware of it.
Well, I think while many schools have pro-life law student organizations, they are definitely not the most popular student groups. It takes, I think, some courage to speak up if you have a pro-life position. But I've discovered that many fellow students, even if they disagree, they do appreciate hearing the pro-life position, and I think they benefit from it. So I think there is definitely a need for these pro-life groups like those at Columbia who put on this great event.
There really is a dearth of pro-life professors and law students that are willing to engage in the campus and actually talk about the issues. And if you feel isolated, which I know a lot of pro-life students do, sometimes you need to be able to hear other people talk about your ideas to kind of have the confidence to advocate for your own.
Well, we have much more about the pro-life movement on our website. Just go to currentsny.net. But stay tuned. When Currents returns, we'll have the day's headlines, including Connecticut bishops criticize a new bill that they say could have disastrous effects. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Francesca Maxime. Coming up later, one city's spirit of survival a year after an earthquake. But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. In a letter to pastors across Connecticut, the state's bishops are warning that an effort to eliminate the statute of limitations in sexual abuse cases could have a disastrous fallout. The bishops write that in states where the statute limits have been temporarily eliminated, at least 7 dioceses have gone bankrupt. Last year, a similar effort to overturn the statute of limitations in New York was undertaken but failed to get the necessary support. The number 2 man at the Vatican says pedophilia is not linked to celibacy, but is linked to homosexuality. Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Bertone made the remarks at a press conference in Chile. Bertone was in Chile to visit areas hard hit by February's earthquake. A senior member of the church body that deals with abuse allegations is weighing in. Monsignor Charles Scicluna recently spoke with the Times of Malta about the Pope and the abuse crisis. We get more now from Rome Reports.
The person at the Vatican in charge of prosecuting abusive priests has stated in an interview the processes are slow, something that in 2005, then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger denounced. Additionally, he recognizes that any measures to make the processes more transparent will also help the church. The prosecutor chosen by the Pope to bring legal action against priests who commit sexual abuse says they're working to make things faster. Additionally, he declared war on the, quote, culture of silence and recalls Benedict XVI's letter to Irish Catholics, where the Pope denounced those who mistakenly failed to report clergy for fear of ruining the good name of the church. In the interview, he explains while dioceses are responsible for preventing these cases by enforcing regulations that protect children and an adequate selection of personnel, the Vatican is responsible for punishing the offenders. The declarations of Monsignor Scicluna conclude with a call to optimism. He expects this crisis will help improve the process and mark an end to this problem.
Well, in Germany, the home where Pope Benedict grew up has been vandalized. The house in a southern Bavarian village was spray painted with an obscene phrase above the main door. A police spokesman didn't go into detail about what the graffiti was, but said it was related to the sex abuse scandal. The house is now a museum dedicated to Benedict. And for the first time, part of a statue of the Virgin Mary that survived a nuclear blast during World War II is coming to New York. The head of the statue was the only piece that survived the bombing of Nagasaki in 1945. It'll be on display at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan on May 2nd. The statue once stood in Nagasaki's Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception. And stay tuned, there's much more current straight ahead. Just ahead, a nation mourns the loss of its leader and many loved ones. Welcome back. Well, in Poland today, a daughter's private grief became public. Marta Kaczynski, the daughter of the first couple, paid her respects at the presidential palace where her mother and father are lying in state. President Lech Kaczynski and his wife were killed in a devastating plane crash last weekend that also claimed the lives of dozens of other leaders, including 2 bishops and several priests. Poland, meantime, is planning a state funeral this Saturday for the president and his wife. And as CNN's Phil Black tells us, the country is still in a state of shock.
Many in this traumatized nation are seeking comfort and answers through prayer. This woman says she came to pray because she spoke to President Kaczynski when he entered this Warsaw church only a week ago. I wanted to say goodbye, she says. While a nation mourns, a smaller group of people must also deal with the knowledge they could have been with the president on that plane. Brigadier General Marian Janicki is a shattered man. He leads the Government Protection Bureau. It's his job to protect the president, and he was going to travel with him to Smolensk. Instead, he sent his deputy and close friend, Yaroslav Florczak. Florczak and 8 other security officers were among those killed in the crash. I'm in deep sorrow, Janicki says. I've lost amazing friends, great people. It's a huge loss. My heart is broken.
I'm missing it very much.
Lena Cichocka is a member of parliament who used to work for the president.
The president of Poland, Lech Kaczyński, of course he was my boss, but he was also a very close person to me, and we had a very special relation.
She gave up her place on the doomed flight because she believed there were other people who deserved it more.
I'm trying to keep myself very strong, because I know that there are people who lost their husbands, fathers, and their very close families.
It was our president.
Grzegorz Szyszewski didn't know the president and didn't like his politics, but he weeps for him. I think we've all been orphaned, he tells me.
Ja nie potrafię się opanować. Łzy same mi napływają do oczu.
I can't control my emotions. I start crying, he says. This young man isn't alone. Across Poland, people are crying, hanging black ribbons from the nation's flag and praying. A president who was unpopular with many has died, and his countrymen are struggling to cope with their grief. That strong feeling across Poland will be focused here on Saturday in Warsaw's main ceremonial square as President Lech Kaczynski and his wife Maria are honoured with a state funeral.
Well, that is Phil Black of CNN. And as we've reported, the tragedy is also having an impact here in Brooklyn, where there is a large and thriving Polish community. Earlier today, I talked with the head of the Polish apostolate for the Diocese of Brooklyn, Father Witold Mrzeski. He's attending a conference in Orchard Lake, Michigan, and he spoke with us by phone. Father Mrzeski, thank you so much for being with us here on Currents today.
Thank you.
We're obviously talking about the terrible tragedy that struck Poland last weekend, and we know that right now you're in Michigan with a bunch of other Polish apostolates. Talk to me a little bit about what the reaction was there when you heard the news and your meetings were just beginning to be underway.
First reaction that we heard about sad news from Poland and Russia on the last weekend was a shock to all of us as a priest and Poles. That air crash in airport right there on the territory of Russia took the lives of so many people, especially our president Lech Kaczyński and his wife Maria, and all officials, also generals of Polish army, and many priests and people who were heads of our government. But here in Orchard Lake schools, when we did open Papa Convention for the priests from the United States who still work in Polish parishes or Polish American parishes, we did open our convention with a prayer for those who died, and also for their families and for all Polish people right there in Poland, with the sorrow, and also we did ask God for His compassion. We were together with the prayer, and we reacted that.
What are the other apostolates saying, and how did you pray together? What exactly were you able to do? You said you opened it with a prayer, and also what have you gathered that people in Poland and in your respective apostolates are saying about this terrible crash?
They said that they have to be solidar with each other, and also. They said about the sadness and about the history of country and of our country, and also about the Katyn took the lives of those who were murdered there 70 years ago, and also those who were on the airplane which went there to pay the homage and to be for the special.
Right, and along those lines, what is it then that you as a spiritual leader and guide can say to people who are suffering in the wake of this tragedy? How can you help people cope with this?
We still help by our prayer, our memory, by our solidarity and forgiveness. So one of the bishops who led the prayer said also about the forgiveness, about God's help with that situation for all of us.
Well, Father Majewski, thank you so much for joining us from Orchard Lake in Michigan, and our prayers go out to you and your community. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And of course, we will continue following this story in the days to come. But for now, stay with us. There's more Currents just ahead. When we return, rebuilding a city and a spirit. Well, over the last several weeks, the world has watched two countries deal with devastating earthquakes, first in Haiti and then in Chile. But in another part of the world, one city is still struggling to rebuild 1 year after a massive quake leveled homes and killed hundreds of people. Now, as we hear from Rome Reports, the Vatican is trying to make sure the world remembers what the people of L'Aquila, Italy can never forget.
It has now been a year since the earthquake in the Italian city of L'Aquila, which left 308 dead and reduced the place to ruins and rubble. That is why Vatican museums have organized the exposition Memory and Hope to show works of art from the churches of L'Aquila also suffered damage.
Since the tragedy that struck us on April the 6th of last year, there have been many initiatives of solidarity, like the exposition of the Vatican museums, where there are goldsmith objects from churches in the region of Abruzzo, in the center of Italy.
With this exposition, the Vatican museums help L'Aquila, a city that doesn't want to lose the memory nor the hope of reconstructing what the earthquake destroyed.
They have brought the center of the Universal Church the testimony of the drama they lived. These objects are not great works of art, painting or sculptures. They are of lesser art, but they are an artistic culture, a tradition, a history. That is why these pieces are so important, because they are the memory of the town.
The memory of the city of L'Aquila is also kept alive by relics that were kept in churches of the city, like this habit of St. Bernard or the clogs of St. Vincent of L'Aquila. This exposition also proposes that they adopt some works of art, like these candelabra or relics for their restoration. An exposition to reinforce the hope in the reconstruction of the city.
Really notable objects there, and what a way to remember L'Aquila by that exhibition right there. And you also might recall that last year our own Bishop DiMarzio, well, he visited L'Aquila. He saw firsthand the devastation and also met with some of the residents there, including local school children. There they are, offering them his prayers and his support, and continues to do so. As for all the victims of the earthquakes throughout the world. Well, that is it for tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk with an actor who is putting his own stamp on the life of a famous saint. And meantime, remember, we are always online at currentsny.net. You can also find us on Twitter, and you can even become our fan on Facebook as well. Until next time, I'm Francesca Maxime. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great night.